Welcome to the Mass Historia podcast. Prepare for your weekly comedic education from our hosts. Tim, medieval enthusiast and engineering student.
This is like the best thing ever.
Right?
Dr. Tom, doctor of nuclear engineering.
I fear what comes next.
And Udo.
Everything that we normally do, that's nonsense and garbage.
Sit back, relax, and open your mind. It's time to get learned.
All right, everybody, welcome to the History podcast. I think we're rolling with that name. It's pretty good. History spelled,
Editor's note. We totally didn't stick with that name.
like mystery only.
Correctly.
All fun,
Right?
I like.
Exactly. What? Seems really good.
It's definitely not right.
Right. Everybody joining me.
Oh my god. Can we have WWJPJ bracelets?
We could.
We desperately need those.
And the other side of the bracelet will just say yellow fever. What would he do? Yellow fever. Right?
Yellow.
Joining me tonight as
What else?
so far as always, we'll see how that works out for the future, is Tim and Dr. Tom.
My people.
Right?
Hey.
How are you guys doing on this fine
I'm so
evening?
excited to be here.
I'm happy to be home.
Did you guys research the topic at all?
A little tiny bit, but I
Okay.
didn't have a lot of time.
Not a huge
but
issue,
I know of it.
right?
I know of it from other times of reading about weird history.
Right.
Yeah,
And this is
I
definitely
basically know the broad strokes, but I don't have any of this huge specifics.
this is definitely a subject that's been covered many times on 5-minute YouTube videos, on hundreds of listicles where everybody's like, here's 11 weird facts about history you didn't know. Now, I have stretched that to 2 hours.
We're getting into the secret history.
Because there's a lot of stuff that isn't mentioned. And, of course, I took some liberties to add a bit of extra history. Because, we're going to go into a little bit about some of the history of items that, are used in the Emu War. We're going to set...
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to set some tone of... some of the stuff we're going to cover here isn't necessarily the Emu War. But it definitely sets the tone for what we're going for tonight.
Context. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, first you said added some extra history, and I was like, did he just make a bunch of shit up?
No. Definitely. Yeah. We are definitely going to cover a little bit about the Lewis gun. Things like that. So, and while it is related, it's not necessarily the Emu War.
I gotcha.
Something I thought I'd do at the beginning of this podcast that I haven't actually done at the other one is I'm going to mention some of my sources, and the primarily what I got most of my sources from was Wikipedia, and their sources listed at the bottom of the article of the Emu Wars.
I have definitely pulled sources. I pulled sources from my doctoral dissertation
Right.
from Wikipedia.
Right.
100%.
And Wikipedia articles work as a great outline to look to what to research to further figure out what everything's about. So then also several YouTube videos that I went through, none of which we'll be showing here because, a lot of work that they did. I don't want to just show off their work. But I definitely watched their stuff, and when this eventually goes up on YouTube, there will be a link to a bunch of YouTube videos I found useful during this.
That's cool.
During this,
Good way to pay it back.
Yeah, I figured, right? And I would be showing you guys actual video of the Emu Wars if it weren't for the fact that the Associated Press bought the rights to all of the old films from around that time on the I think I want to say Britannia Warner, or it's something like that. It's a cinema company. They bought all of the rights to all of those videos and have locked them behind paywalls because they have taken the physical video and made it digital, which has thus renewed the copyright on them. So,
That's being horseshit.
yeah, keeping us from actually looking at history because money. One day, our podcast will have enough money to be able to be like, yeah, sure, I'll buy that.
Hell
But
yeah, we will.
Well, that's capitalism at its finest.
all right.
Yep.
But okay, tonight we are going to be traveling to take a look at the Emu Wars, which is a war that was fought between the country of Australia. At that point, it was the Federation of Australia.
Bunch of fucking birds.
And a giant, terrifying series of birds.
The country versus fauna.
Right. All right. Our story tonight occurs in the Southern Hemisphere, in the exotic continent of Australia. So let's set the stage for the coming conflict. Australia covers 7,682,300 square kilometers of land and 58,900 square kilometers of water. It makes it the sixth. Yeah, this is a very interesting image, by the way.
So good.
It makes it the sixth largest nation in the world, with the total area of 7,741,220 square kilometers. The first known landing in Australia by Europeans was by Dutch navigator Wilhelm Jan Zoon in 1606, but soon after, several other explorers followed. Eventually, a fleet of British ships would arrive at Botany Bay in January of 1788 and establish a penal colony, the first colony in all of the Australian mainland. In the century that followed, the British established other colonies. So the British established other colonies on the continent, and European explorers ventured into its interior. Indigenous Australians were greatly weakened, and their numbers were diminished. They were introduced to diseases and conflict with the colonialists. From shortly after its settlement, Australians have been involved in military activity in many places for a variety of reasons. Prior to its federation, Australians fought in Australia as well as abroad.
They fought abroad?
Yes.
What was her name?
Likely Betsy. I mean, it's...
Yeah, that stands to reason.
Thinking about the time frame, I mean, Betsy's a safe bet, or, I mean, like,
Yeah.
old lady
Betsy.
names. Yeah. Australia's track record for war is considered rather successful. Minor battles took place in the Castle Hill Convict Rebellion against rebelling prisoners in 1804, and according to officials, 233 convicts led by Philip Cunningham, a veteran of the Irish Rebellion in 1798, as well as a mutiny on the convict transport ship the Anne. There we go back to fucking stupid ship names. Escaped
Why
from
not like the SS will murder you if you mutiny?
right.
Like, come on, give me a good name.
Well, it would have been the HMS.
HMS, right?
HMS will murder you if you mutiny. There we go.
Escaped from a prison farm intent on capturing ships to sail back to Ireland. In response, martial law was declared, and colonial law in the New South Wales was reestablished. The mostly Irish rebels gathered reinforcements and were hunted by the colonial forces until they were sequestered in 1804 on a hillock named Vinegar Hill. Under a flag of truce, Cunningham was arrested, and troops were charged by the rebellion and crushed by a raid. 9 of the rebel leaders were executed, and hundreds were punished before martial law was finally revoked a week after the beginning of the battle. There was also the Eureka Rebellion, which was a rebellion instigated by gold miners in Ballarat, Victoria, who were revolted against colonial authority in the United Kingdom. It culminated in the Battle of the Eureka Stockade, which was fought between miners and colonial forces of Australia on the 3rd of December, 1854, at the Eureka Lead, and was named for the stockade structure that was built by the miners during the conflict. The rebellion resulted in the deaths of at least 27 people, the majority of whom were rebels. So, Australia seemed to have a pretty good track record, right, so far.
Get the shit together. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And as many as 20,000 Australians fought in the South African Wars against the Boers. Significant battles included Sunnyside, Slingers Fontaine, Pink Hill, Diamond Hill, Coster River, and Eland's River. Sunnyside, in particular, although considered a minor action, was fought on the 1st of January in 1900 during the Second South African War, which was a flying column formation of 500 British soldiers, Canadian soldiers, and Australian troops under Lieutenant Colonel T.D. Pilcher of the North Cumberland Fusiliers. When they attacked a camp of 180 Boers near the township of Douglas, with a barrage of fire from 2 machine guns, the Boers were taken completely by surprise. And I'm not saying that this information is super relevant going forward, but I will let you make your own decisions in the future.
Oh, God. It sounds like the Australians did not mess around and were not afraid to kick ass and take names.
Right. Well, I just want you guys to, using surprise formations, 2 machine guns. Things that you guys need to know.
Yeah.
Tim, how long do you think, after what we've just discussed, it would be before Australia would actually become a nation? It's not even Australia at this point. It's still British colonies.
So are you talking after the South African...
Right. South African
skirmishes?
Wars. Yep.
I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Australia became a nation in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Mm-hmm. It does say guess. It's not like you have to get it right.
I'm going to go with 20 years.
20 years? Dr. Tom, how long would you say?
Roughly 5 seconds, because they were slaughtering things with machine guns, and don't fuck around with machine guns.
Well, fun fact, rugby was so popular in South Africa that in 1902, there was a temporary ceasefire in the Second Boer War so that a game could be played between British and Boer forces.
Please tell me the British forces won.
I feel like a terrible journalist. I didn't look that up. I should know this. I should know who won the game. But what we just covered was in 1900 exactly. All of that was before the Commonwealth of Australia had come into being, when the federal constitution was proclaimed by the Governor-General, Lord Hopetoun, on January 1st of 1901. Almost 1 year later, they became Australia. The Federalist Papers that they had, the Federalist Constitution, was a agreement with Britain that Australia would be able to govern itself instead of being separated colonies. So they were still very, very, very allied with the British at this point, but they were their own federalist group.
So, for the record, the British-Boer rugby match, while there was a ceasefire called for the game to be played, never actually was played.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to make a joke, because if I hadn't found that, because I did a little digging, I was going to say, well, the results were really contested, and that's how the ceasefire ended. They just went back to murdering each other. Hey, you what? No, that was a fucking goal.
All right, so now that Australia was its own fully fledged federation, its military streak continued. It sent a warship to the Boxer Rebellion in China to back British forces there. And it wasn't long after that Australia entered into one of the most deadly and notorious wars that the world had ever seen. World War One.
Oh.
Yeah. Actually serious there, you know?
I thought you were going to say the most deadly and serious wars ever. The Emu Wars.
Australia's involvement in the First World War began when Britain and Germany went to war on the 4th of August in 1914. Both the Prime Minister Joseph Cook and the opposition leader Andrew Fisher, who were in the midst of an election campaign, pledged full support for Britain. The outbreak of the war was greeted very well in Australia, as in other places, and with much enthusiasm.
Yeah, they might be able to play more rugby.
Right? The first significant Australian action of World War I was when the Australian Naval and Military Expedition Force, the ANMEF, landing on Rabaul on the 11th of September, 1914. The ANMEF took possession of a German-controlled New Guinea at Toma on 17th of September, and the neighboring islands of Bismarck Archipelago in October. On the 9th of November, the Royal Australian Navy made a major contribution when the HMAS Sydney destroyed the German raider, the SMS Emden. So,
Emden's a pretty cool boat name.
Yeah. I mean, and naming a boat after, you know, the your capital is pretty cool too. Like,
yeah,
because I can see the USS Washington being a cool ship name, which I think it is. But yeah. Then they fought in World War I in the Middle East. The Middle East campaign began in 1916 with Australian troops taking part in a defense of the Suez Canal on the Allied reconquest of Sinai Desert. The following year, Australian and other Allied troops advanced into Palestine and captured Gaza and Jerusalem. By 1918, they had occupied Lebanon and Syria, and at that point, 1918, Turkey sued for peace. So, yeah. They fought long and hard in World War I.
There's a lot of old folk songs about the Australian involvement in World War I. The most famous being Waltzing Matilda.
Oh, yeah.
Or the band played Waltzing Matilda, not the actual song itself, but it's a folk song about a guy. It's really good.
Right?
Yeah.
The Australians in the Middle East fought a mobile war against the Ottoman Empire in conditions completely different from the mud and stagnation of the Western Front. Mounted troops of the Austrian Light Horse and Imperial Camel Corps endured extreme heat, harsh terrain, and water shortages. Yet, casualties were comparatively light, with only 1,394 Australians killed in the 3 years of fighting.
Dang.
So they did relatively well. Dr. Tom, would you rather have fought in World War I or World War II based on your current knowledge?
So based on my current knowledge, my understanding of World War I was that in a lot of ways, so it depends on could I have been an Australian? If I get to be an Australian in World War I, fuck yeah, let's do it. But my understanding is that by and large, the trenches were pretty close to a literal definition of hell.
Right.
In World War II, we had nice things like penicillin.
Right.
So I'm gonna go with, just based on penicillin alone, I'm gonna go with World War II, I think. But if I could pick to specifically be part of the Australian Mounted Corps in World War I, that sounds pretty dope.
Would you want to be on a horse or a camel?
Oh, dude, a camel.
Right. All right, Tim. Tim, what would you think? World War I or World War II based on current knowledge?
A quick rebuttal to Tom's comment. Being part of the Australian Mounted Corps was not exactly great.
That's true.
They came under a lot of shelling from the Turks.
Okay, I was also thinking the water shortages were probably pretty awful.
Right.
Dehydration is horrendous.
But in terms of whether I'd fight in World War I or World War II, again, like Tom said, it depends on who I'm fighting for. Like if I'm fighting for Canada, who gives a shit?
Right.
But in terms of the knowledge I'm currently aware of, I'd much rather fight in World War II.
Right. The reason I asked this question for everybody, is just to continue to set the stage of what these veterans after this war were like. So if you guys were like, oh, I'd rather fight in World War II, imagine being these guys when they came back from World War I.
Yep.
And an interesting piece of information that I did not know until I did the research for this story. The Australian population in 1914 was less than 5 million. 8.2% of them fought in World War I.
That's incredible.
By and far, the Australian contribution to World War I was greater than any other country by populace.
Yeah, per capita.
Yeah.
Per capita. Yeah.
And because I'm assuming back then it was almost entirely men fighting. That's like roughly 1 in 6 of all Australian men fought in World War I.
Yep.
Including, God, that's like, I would almost even say like potentially like approaching half of their men of serving age or of service age.
And this number does not count the women and children at home serving in non-combat functions. So yeah. This was
Australia doesn't fuck around.
Right.
Holy crap.
With the end of World War I, Australia found themselves with a bit of an issue. They had pushed their military to larger levels than they had ever done before. With 300,000 now battle-trained soldiers returning from overseas, what were these soldiers going to do? A lot of the soldiers, it's actually the opposite. It's pretty funny. A lot of jobs had been created for the war effort, and now those jobs are gone. And people were starting to get worried.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the war had drastically changed Australia. Until now, Australia had been relatively unknown. Buried deep in the southern oceans, on a hostile human island, were a bunch of colonists who had recently become their own government. By the conclusion of the First World War, Australia, due to its sacrifice per capita of any other allied nation, is now on the map.
Well, yeah, and I figured when a country is ready to fling basically all of their men of service age and turn itself into pretty literally a war nation. For those years they, as a country, more or less did war, and it seems like not that much else. I'm sure there was other stuff still.
Mm-hmm.
But don't screw with a country that's willing to be all right, our entire country is coming to kill you now.
As the ensuing peace talks unfolded, the Australian Prime Minister established their presence on the international stage by going blow for blow with British prime ministers, Japanese emperors, and an American president who described him as a pestiferous varmint.
What does pestiferous mean? Pestilent? Pestily?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was
That's a good word.
Right. At the end of the war, left Australia with another issue, and that was that was just as trying as the conflict itself, which was taking care of the survivors and the war widows and their children.
Yeah.
The long-term cost of medical care and welfare benefits to the returned soldiers and the dependents of those who didn't return was on a scale that they had never before encountered. A peak of 283,322 war pensions were being paid in 1932. Yes.
Dang.
A very large amount of pensions there.
Yeah, and especially for a country of only 5 million. That's
right.
So much.
Real side interesting bit of trivia. Do you know when the last person receiving a Civil War pension died?
Mm-mm.
I'm going to guess 1940s, early 1940s.
I want to say 2010. Oh, okay.
They're still alive.
Oh, wow.
Wait, what? No, es posible?
So there was the specific person I'm talking about was very, very young when she married a very, very old Civil War veteran. And she received his pension. And then her daughter is still receiving that pension.
Interesting. Another side note, something I learned while researching for this episode. Australia received its final payment from Germany for World War One. Because everybody had to get reparations, right, after the war, because there's war taxes and stuff, right? When you lose, you have to pay everyone. They received their final payment in 2010.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because my understanding was, I remember an old history teacher of mine who did his dissertation on interwar economics. I remember him talking about that. His conclusion from all the research he had done was basically that there were reasonable odds that World War II would have never happened if not for the reparations of World War One, because they absolutely crushed the German economy for multiple decades under reparations.
Right.
And Germany was like, all right, to hell with this. We're not going to live under your yoke forever. We're coming to kill you. And I mean, not that I'm defending World War II Germany. Jesus.
Right. Okay, so Australia's heavy dependence on primary exports meant that Australia felt the Great Depression and as it affected the country acutely. As an imperial dominion, Australia's economy was very intricately linked with Britain. As well as trade, Australia was still very dependent on industrial capital from Britain. So as the British economy slumped after World War I, so did the Australian economy.
Right. They're tied hand and foot.
Right. Unemployment levels in Australia reached a record high of 29% in 1932.
Ooh.
Which was one of the highest ever seen in the world at that point.
Damn.
Right. The country was in full-scale panic during its tumultuous period, but they had a plan. The Australian government gave a large number of the Aussie ex-soldiers, along with some British veterans, land and instructions to take up farming in Western Australia.
Go make products so we can sell products.
Right?
Yeah.
Up until this point, the land that they considered the land that they gave them to be of marginal value. But if some farmers could put in some backbreaking work, they could turn it into some profitable fields. And with the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, these farmers were encouraged to increase their wheat crops, with the government promising and ultimately failing to deliver assistance via the form of subsidies. In spite of the recommendations of the promised subsidies, wheat prices continued to fall. In October of 1932, these matters were becoming very intense, with the farmers preparing to harvest the crops while simultaneously threatening to refuse to deliver the wheat. I want everybody to notice, it's half an hour into the podcast. And I have not once even mentioned the word emu.
I have not yet begun to emu.
That being said, you're about to.
Right? So, fun fact, at this time, because of how bad it was, 30,000 British migrants returned to Britain between 1930 and 1936. The rest of our story will take place in the year 1932, which is mentioned quite a few times in the last couple of slides because it's the worst time, which is the perfect time
It was the best of times. It was the worst.
for an unexpected enemy to attack. Right? Enter Dromaeus nova hollandi, which is also known as the emu. It's the second largest living bird by height, following its relative, the ostrich.
Wait, they're not the same thing?
Nope.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
I did not know that.
Nope. They're a completely different animal. They're in the same genus, but they are they are different species.
Okay.
Emus are soft-feathered, brown, flightless birds with long necks that reach up to about 1.9 meters, which is 6.2 feet in height.
That's a tall bird.
These are big birds. These are big birds.
So, for the record, Tom, the ostrich is native to Africa. Didn't actually. It's not endemic to Australia. It was brought to Australia at one point for farming, but then they got loose. So now there's a wild population of ostriches.
Right.
Alongside emus.
Don't
but
fuck with the ostriches.
Right.
Yeah, ostriches are native to Africa.
Okay.
So emus are usually solitary animals, but here's an important piece of information. They will gather in flocks when large quantities of food are available.
Oh,
like,
no.
especially food that's, all of one type, all in one big giant location, almost like it's being cultivated.
Like somebody's
Oh,
getting
no.
ready to, yeah.
That didn't click until Tim said that.
Right? So emus regularly migrate after their breeding season, heading from the coast of the inland regions. With the cleared land and additional water supplies being made available for livestock by the West Australian farmers, the emus found a place that was prime habitat. The emus ravenously and in mass consumed the crops, particularly in the marginal farming land found around Chandler and Walgoolan.
A little bit of more information on this. I from what I understand from a little bit of research I've done and things I remember from the past, the emus ultimately came to the fields because the fields destroyed their natural habitat, therefore cutting off their wild food source, or at least not cutting it off, but diminishing it, such that they had to look elsewhere for food. And hey, look, fields full of food.
Well, the info that I've got here says that it was a perfect storm for them. The fact that there was readily available food, readily available water, and little resistance. The farmers had added something very important to the land that was, it kept things like predators out of the area. Those were fences, right?
Right.
Large fences. And they're also meant to keep out things like rabbits and other smaller animals that would, come in and devour your crops. But these birds are not careful. Each one of them was capable of eating roughly 1.5 pounds of grain each, but in order to do so, they also consume stones to keep in their gizzards.
Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these birds eat rocks.
That's common with ostriches as well.
Right? They also eat charcoal, although the reason for this is unclear, according to the research that I was able to find. They just eat charcoal.
I wonder if they just think it's a rock.
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean,
It's a really dark rock.
Right? Also, they can't really jump. They can jump a little, but they can't jump a lot.
Not much.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So they needed to enter the fields, and there's only one way that they could do it: by crushing the fences and leaving large gaps. So these birds...
There's a lot of birds.
Right?
That is like a horrifying stampede of birds.
Yeah, it's awful. Like,
I think one might even call that a fucking plethora.
Right? Nothing was safe. Not to mention the amount of filth and feathers that were deposited in these fields. The fence holes also caused an entirely different problem, as now rabbits could enter and cause further problems.
Oh no.
Right.
Yeah. Well, big giant hole in the fence. All of a sudden, your fence isn't a fence.
Yeah.
All right, Tim. You walk outside and you see roughly 1,000 giant terror birds. What do?
Well, they're terror birds, so running isn't really an option.
Right.
I go back inside and I shut the fucking door.
Call my family and tell them I love them.
Right.
Yep.
Try and look as unlike food as possible.
Right. I'm not wheat. I'm not wheat. I'm not wheat.
Do this with my arms and
just try to
pretend to be a terror bird.
Just fit in with the emus. All right.
Day 3, they still don't suspect.
Right. So the emu is an omnivore. It eats both plants and animals. It likes to eat caterpillars, large insects, small lizards, rodents, flowers, seeds, buds, and shoots. So
and people.
Right. And souls. Like, as you can imagine, the farmers...
Oh, what a soup catcher on that guy.
Right? As you can imagine...
Pestiferous varmint.
Right? Farmers had problems with all of this that's going on at this point, right? They relayed their concerns about the birds ravaging their crops, and a deputization of ex-soldiers were sent to meet with the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pierce. So when you guys said go back inside or blend in with the emus, they called the army.
Nope.
No.
Right.
Nope, just go back inside. It's fine. It's fine.
Right? Sir George Pierce was an Australian politician who served as senator for West Australia from 1901 to 1938. He began his career in the Labour Party, but then later joined the National Labour Party, then the Nationalist Party, then the United Australian Party, and served as a cabinet minister under prime ministers from all 4 parties. So this guy was getting around.
Yeah.
He was
Dude.
Yep. He was later referred to in Parliament as the Minister of the Emu War by Senator James Dunn. Interesting fact.
Not a compliment, I'm guessing.
Yep. Interesting fact. The article on Wikipedia for Sir George Pierce does not in any way, shape, or form mention the Emu War, and I find this very shameful. As you will see, he is very involved in this for quite a while. So
I gotta wonder if this is like an ancestor or grandson or whatever that's like, nope, stop smearing that fucking name.
Exactly. Quit calling him the emu minister. Like,
oh my god.
So, having served in World War I, the soldiers were well aware of the effectiveness of machine guns, and they requested...
Yeah, Lewis guns. Yeah.
Right? They requested that the military deploy such action. They specifically requested machine guns. The minister readily agreed, although with conditions attached. The guns were going to be used by current military personnel, and troop transport was going to be financed by the Western Australian government, and that the farmers would then provide food, accommodation, and payment for the ammunition. Pierce also supported the deployment of on the ground that the birds would be good target practice. Although it has been argued,
like he was very, very wrong.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Although it has been argued that some in the government viewed this to be a way of being seen helping the Western Australian farmers and to stave off the secession movement that was brewing at the same time. And towards an end that a cinematographer, here's the word that I was looking for earlier, Fox Movietone, that was the company. But Fox Movietone and all of their films were purchased by the Associated Press, so we can't watch them because capitalism.
Fuck you, Associated Press.
Right? Military involvement was due to begin in October of 1932, and the war was conducted under the command of Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery, with Meredith commanding soldiers Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran, armed with 2 Lewis guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. And here's something I wanted to point out. I watched tens of Emu War videos and read a metric buttload of articles about this. Right now, you are all witnessing the first time that this image has been shown, that this is a picture of Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. I got this by looking through the scanned archives of the website trove.nla.gov.au and its newspapers. This was from the front page of the Daily News on November 3rd, 1932. Hashtag journalism flex.
Hell yeah.
And we will be reading from this newspaper later in the show. But everybody had pictures of Major Meredith, but nobody had pictures of the other 2 guys who served. This is the best picture I could find. It is terrible. You can't see anything about them, but this is the 2 guys.
Yay.
Right.
These are so
It is 1932. It's difficult to get a good photo in 1932. That's long exposure times.
Right.
That's true.
Right. And then it was translated into the earliest form of dot matrix printer, right?
Right. I mean, it's not like you could take the picture and then look at your camera like you can today and go, was that a good picture or not? It's like a minute exposure time, and then you got to take it back to the lab and develop it, then print it to find out if it was good or not.
Right. So, Dr. Tom, thinking back to our episode on JPJ, we're about to have the first attempt at something. Hard times are ahead. What do you think will be the first problem that Australia will face?
Yellow fever!
God damn it, you just took my answer.
Sucker!
Are you guys both saying yellow fever?
Well,
Think back to the first time a big grand plan was attempted. There's something that they could not expect.
weather.
Australia is the world's second driest continent after Antarctica, with an average annual rainfall of below 600 millimeters and over 80% of the country, and below 30 or 300 millimeters over 50. But not that month.
Most of the central part of Australia is uninhabited.
Right?
Or at least sparsely inhabited. I shouldn't say uninhabited.
Desert.
But not that month. Until November 2nd, it rained very heavily, and it caused the emus to scatter over a much wider area, preventing the mission from going forward. The command in charge of the operation felt that chasing the mobs of the emus all over the vast area would be too much work, and they didn't want the machine guns to be dragged all over Hell and Halfacre. So When the rain cleared and the emu hordes returned to the fields of wheat, the troopers were finally deployed with orders to assist the farmers and, according to a newspaper account, to collect 100 emu skins so that their feathers could be used to make hats for the light horseman infantry or light horseman cavalry. Wait,
not what?
Exactly.
Hell yeah.
So here's that article, and I'm going to read it here. And this is what people were saying in 1932 on the day after the very first time that they went out to go fight the emus. Holding their own. Champions Emus Strategies. Or Campion. Sorry, that's the name of the place. Campion, right? The emus are more than holding their own against the Defense Department's crack gunners. The first day's warfare saw their ranks, variously estimated to be between 5,000 and 10,000, reduced by only 20. Major Meredith and his men can possibly claim more victims of their fire, for many birds, obviously wounded, did not drop. The emu is a hardy bird, and settlers say that with a bullet, it will fail to kill it outright. After an exhibition shoot, which saw the emus retire with about half a dozen casualties, the day was spent visiting the paddocks by the Lewis gunners, Sergeant McMurray and Gunner O'Halloran, their weapons being transported on motor trucks.
Wait, did they kill 6 birds and call it a day? Be like, yeah, we got them.
They killed 20.
Oh, okay. I thought you said a half dozen.
They killed 6, and then they all ran away.
Right.
So then they went hunting.
Right. No less than 9 cars full of settlers formed the expedition, and doubtless the cavalcade had much to do with frightening the birds. All day long, the emus proved an elusive target. Generally, they managed to keep thousands of yards between themselves and their pursuers. McMurray and O'Halloran proved themselves crack shots by bringing down birds nearly 3/4 of a mile away. But for 2 reasons, they were unable to mow down the pests as anticipated. First, the long range. The nearest to the party could get to the emus was about 600 yards. And second, 2 birds appeared, not flocks of several hundred, but in groups of 30 or 40. The farmers have been raging a second war on the pests. One settler killed 700 on his property, and the birds are now very wary and hard to approach. Such difficulty was experienced in getting within effective firing distance that it was decided to lie in ambush at sundown at a dam and wait for the birds to come to drink. Gunners, pressmen, and photographers waited for an hour, but their patience was unrewarded.
Oh, no.
So as you can tell...
Basically what it comes down to is a big, giant military expedition to go shoot birds, and it turns out wild animals are scared of cars and loud and things that make super loud noises.
Right?
Who'd have thunk?
Yep.
Yeah.
They didn't quite do it.
Oh my god.
So here's the official reports, right? So that's what the news published that day. But the official stuff gathered throughout military reports and stuff like that. On November 2nd, the men traveled to Campion, where some 50 emus were sighted. As the birds were out of range of the guns, the local settlers attempted to herd the emus into an ambush. But the birds split into much smaller groups and ran in various directions, and then became much more difficult to target. Nevertheless, while the first fusillade from the machine guns was ineffective due to range, the second round of gunfire was able to kill, and this is according to military reports, a number of birds.
What?
In the official report, it says we killed a number of birds.
Oh my god!
Yeah, basically, it might as well have said we killed between 1 and another number.
Right.
We killed a fair few.
Later in the same day, a small flock was encountered, and then another phrase used in the official reports: perhaps a dozen of the birds were killed.
Oh, mate, we thought perhaps.
Here's a quote. This is a quote from Gunner J. O'Halloran. There's only one way to kill an emu. You shoot him right through the back of the head with his mouth closed, or through the front of his mouth when his mouth is open. That's how hard it is. I apologize. I apologize for my Australian accent there, but the Lewis gun. This is the gun that they used, right?
That is a cool looking gun.
Right. The Lewis gun, or Lewis automatic machine gun, or Lewis automatic rifle, is a First World War era light machine gun of United States design that was perfected and mass-produced in the United Kingdom. And it was widely used by troops of the British Empire during the First World War. It had a distinctive barrel cooling shroud that contained finned aluminum breech-to-muzzle heat sinks to cool the gun, and a top-mounted pan magazine. The Lewis served through the end of the Korean War. It was also widely used as an aircraft machine gun, almost always with the cooling shroud removed, because you're in the air and the airflow is good enough for that. The Lewis gun is also the most recognized classic light machine gun in the world.
Yeah. It was used as a template for a couple of the rifles in Star Wars.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. Very much.
Oh, yeah, it was. I remember those top magazine guns in Star Wars.
Yep. Very, very cool gun.
Yeah.
Fun fact, the Wikipedia page for the Lewis gun does list the Emu War in its service record or service history, and that makes me very happy. So the guy who okayed the war, that's not in his Wikipedia profile. The gun they shot the emus with, it's listed. Right.
Well, the gun didn't fuck up. The Australians did.
Well, yeah, the gun performed exactly as the gun was intended to,
right.
But basically they used the wrong gun.
Right. Another fun fact here, the Lewis gun was also the first gun ever put on an airplane. And it looks hilarious and badass at the same time.
Yeah, that does look like I'm gonna murder you and look stupid while I do
They're
it.
in their little gyrocopter. Fucking...
Where's the pedals?
Right? I feel like that gun is going to be too strong for that little jalopy. Right? Like...
Well, the way they fly is they point it backwards and shoot.
Video game physics just... We've only got enough bullets to make it half a mile.
Well, we'll kill a lot of Germans on the way.
Exactly.
Save the underclip for the trip back.
So, on November 4th, Meredith had established an ambush position near a local dam where more than 1,000 emus were spotted headed towards their position. This time, the gunners waited until the birds were very close before opening fire. A hail of bullets rained down upon the emu forces, at least until the gun jammed, after 12 birds were killed, and the remainder scattered before the gun could be repaired, and any more emus could be shot.
Oh,
So, Tom, you were saying that the gun performed its job? Turns out it didn't.
No, it didn't.
No, it didn't at all.
Sure it didn't. You had one job, Lewis gun.
Right.
Job was to kill things, and you failed.
After that failed attempt, no more emu were sighted on November the 4th. So now I know my birthday shares the day with the day that the Lewis gun failed. In the days that followed, Meredith chose to move his forces further south, where the birds were reported to be fairly tame. But apparently, a tame emu is still a force to be reckoned with. By the 4th day of the campaign, the army observers noted that each pack seems to have its own leader now. A big black plumed bird, which stands fully 6 feet high and keeps watch while his mates carry out their work of destruction and warns them of our approach. That was written by an army observer. Like one of the men like that was supporting these guys dropped by and was all like, they've messed with us.
This just sounds increasingly like Jurassic Park.
Right. So Tim, what would you name these new elite emu units? The black plumed terror birds that warn everyone else. Like, are these evolved emus, elite emus, leader emus, e-mutants?
I'm trying to think of like something along the lines of like Black Emu Down or something like that.
I almost lost my coffee there. It's pretty good. How about you, Dr. Tom? Do you have a name for these new elite emu units?
I mean, you said black plumed terror birds, and I was like, yeah, okay.
Right.
We're done.
Yeah, we're done.
Right.
Black plumed terror birds done. Oh, please kill them all. Every last one.
All right. Here's another quote for you guys. And this is from Major Meredith himself. If we had a military division of the bullet carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. This was
I love how bullet carrying there means ability to get shot a
right?
fuckload and not die.
Right.
Well, and I'm guessing conversely, if you take that as literal, I'm guessing emus can carry a lot of weight in bullets.
Right.
That's true.
So Meredith went even so far as to mount one of the guns on a truck.
No, the trucks are loud and they scare the birds, you asshole.
This was a move that proved to be rather ineffective, as the truck was unable to gain any speed on the birds.
I was going to say, turned out emus can run really fast, and they don't like roads.
Right. The truck was unable to gain any speed on the birds, and the ride was so rough that the gunner was unable to fire any shots.
Oh, yeah.
The emus that saw them coming bolted, usually keeping a good kilometer ahead of Meredith and his men. But when they did catch up, it was often even worse. Shortly after, the papers reported that the truck had accidentally rammed into an emu. The body became wedged in the steering gears of the truck.
Oh, that's disgusting.
And they had to swerve, and they demolished half a chain of fencing.
On the other hand, that is an emu.
Doing the emu's job for him.
That is like the 15th emu they've managed to kill so far.
Fuck
Right.
your fat mama.
Fun fact, an emu is a fast-running animal. It can reach 30 miles an hour pretty easily.
Damn.
Also,
Yep,
fun
like I
fact,
said, emus can run pretty fast.
in the 1930s, cars went about 50 miles an hour, but not off-road.
Oh my god, their suspensions were probably not.
Oh, yeah.
That would've been a hellish ride.
Right?
Just like my ass.
You were just in a really, really, really fast Red Ryder, right? Like that fucking little red wagon, right? By the 8th of November, 6 days after the first engagement, 2,500 rounds of ammunition had been fired.
Yeah.
The number of birds killed is uncertain. One account estimates it to be at 50 birds. Other accounts that have been called into question, being provided by the settlers, put it at 200 to 500. And the settlers had reasons, as you guys will find out, to inflate those numbers. Meredith's official report noted that his men had suffered 0 casualties.
I'm glad nobody died to the fucking bird.
That's not true. There was a fence.
Right? Though that was just a bystander. That was just a bystander.
And steering gears.
Right?
Yeah, that car was totally boned.
A number of birds that were killed was about 50, some saying 200 to 500. The ornithologist and president of the Royal Australian Ornithologist Union Dominic Sovereignty said, right? Yeah. I mean, let me try that one more time. The Royal Australian Ornithologists Union Dominic Sovereignty, his name is Dominic Sovereignty, commented that the machine gunner's dreams of point-blank fire into a serried mass of emus was soon dissipated. The emu command had evidently ordered guerrilla tactics and its unwieldy army soon split up into innumerable small units that made use of the military equipment uneconomic. A crestfallen field force therefore withdrew from the combat area after about a month.
Oh my god.
I'd like to point out one piece on that previous slide. They talked about constructing a 52,000-pound fence, and pounds as in units of money. If you account for inflation and move that to U.S. dollars, that's a $4 million fence.
Damn.
They should make the emus pay for it.
Right.
I hate.
Exactly. In fact, I'm going to read a little bit off of this page here. New strategy in a war on the emu. When the Western Australian State Cabinet last week approved the expenditure of 52,000 pounds as a special defense measure, this represented the opening of yet another major engagement in an unceasing war against an enemy as old as Western Australia itself. Now, some of this is cut off because this clip is actually cut off. But this war, ironically enough, is one being continually waged against a creature regarded at home and abroad as the national symbol of Australia. It's on their crest. They have an emu and a kangaroo and a crest. That is...
Well, yeah, because the emus won the war.
Right?
It was part of the peace talks.
They had to put them on there.
Stop murdering your whole country.
Right. The enemy is the tough, prolific, gangling marauder of the sand plains, whose species, ever since the beginning of agriculture in the state, has invaded in a frenzy of hunger, and since the finest fields at the time of ripening and the harvest to shear off crops with a voracious beak and to trample, and then it cuts off. Non-flying native emu has become for farmers a pest that has cost millions of pounds in lost production in recent years. Now the state government has drawn up plans for a new defensive engagement against the pest. Its strategy is based on a decision to build a 52,000-pound emu-proof fence. The fence will be about 135 miles long, and it will be joined to the government-maintained rabbit-proof fences, which stretch across the great part of the state.
We got the rabbit fence and the emu fence.
Right.
Oh my god.
Those the zones that the experts now hope to pen them, they merely hope for they know from experience that the emu is a tough and unpredictable adversary. The Western Australian government and farmers for generations past have employed a variety of methods to control the menace, including poisoning, trapping, and shooting on a grand scale. These have met the best with mixed results, and even in times have resulted in such farcical and humiliating defeats that there are many officials and experts today in the state who cannot bear to be reminded of the outcome of some of the more ambitious efforts of emu destruction. It became surprisingly obvious that the open warfare against the birds was useless because of the speed of their retreat and maneuver, and even became apparent that toughness of their feathered hides made them immune to glancing volleys of machine gun bullets.
Jesus.
The second-day expedition leader decided upon the more careful strategy. The party rose to a daybreak to prepare an ambush near a dam, where 1,000 birds had been reported to be moving, when, just after daylight, a wave of bobbing heads appeared in the distance. The detachment of the armed farmer companions were bushed in, and then I can't read the rest of it. The rest of it is really gone. It's all cut off, right?
This sounds more like a zombie horror than fighting goddamn birds.
It's still pretty good, right? Back off the front, another battle then yet raged. This battle wouldn't be against the emus, but against the cities themselves. When the people of Australia heard what Pierce was doing, they protested very hard. Senator James Guthrie led a fight against Pierce's plan, which the press quickly named the Emu War. Guthrie said that it was unnecessarily cruel, and if the emu had to go, he argued that it should be done through more humane and less spectacular methods.
I will say, I feel like Actually, like having read World War Z, I remember one of the big notes, and part of the reason this reminds me of that is they talk about that at the beginning of in the fiction of it at the beginning of World War Z. They try just machine gunning all of the zombies, and it doesn't work because they're just like, okay, bullets, what else?
Right.
And you have to shoot them in the front of the head while the mouth is open, or the back of the head while the mouth is closed.
Right.
And what they wind up doing, at least in World War Z, what they wind up doing is they make huge blocks of riflemen that it's just aim for the head, pop the head, aim for the head, pop the head, and do that.
We'll get there.
Right.
We'll get there.
Okay, I swear to God, if Australia adopts those tactics, emus are zombies.
Well, the Australian military didn't.
Emus are zombies.
Right. We'll get there.
Okay.
Yep.
Stop jumping ahead, Tom.
I'm sorry. This just keeps reminding me of World War Z.
What that makes me think is that Max Brooks based that book off of the Emu Wars. We've just blown it open. We've blown the case open, wide open.
Yep.
Max Brooks, I've got your number. We've done it. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got him.
I'm on to you.
All right.
Case closed.
All right. So over the next few days, the papers on the East Coast were filled with think pieces calling Pierce's attacks a brutal form of mass slaughter and rhapsodizing the emu as the great Australian bird.
Little Satans.
Right? Even without the support of the city, the Emu War marched forward. The farmers would adopt any effective method to protect their crops, one paper declared, and would not ask the permission of anyone before doing so. On the 8th of November, representatives from the Australian House of Representatives discussed the operation. Following the negative coverage of the events in the local media that included claims that only a few emus had died, Pierce withdrew military personnel and the guns on the same day. After the withdrawal, Major Meredith compared the emus to the Zulus and commented on the striking maneuverability of the emus, even while badly wounded.
Oh, I'm just at the Zulu comparison. It's just like, oh my God, Australia, please be less racist.
Right.
It wasn't racism. It was a compliment. They had a great respect for the Zulus, and they were the reason they were comparing the emus to the Zulus is they were comparing them to people that they thought were really, really good warriors.
Okay.
Yeah, they fought for a long time over there in South Africa.
They were tenacious. They had amazing maneuverability and guerrilla tactics. It was the Zulus were definitely respected by
by the military. Okay. I just heard like comparing people of color to wild animals. Jesus Christ! Oh my God! Please no.
Oh right, yeah.
My immediate reaction.
So the 8th of November, 1932, it seemed that Australia had suffered its first defeat on home soil, and the emus had won the Great Emu War.
Squawk! Victory screech!
All right, Dr. Tom, if you were in charge of this operation, what would you have done different up until this point?
The big thing is, honestly, the World War Z thing. Get like 30 people with rifles who are sharpshooters and walk on foot or use horses, maybe.
Right.
But something that's quieter than a goddamn car.
Right.
And walk around and pop heads. I also think it's probably more humane than like a bird that takes a bullet to the torso and runs off screaming and then dies 3 days later.
How about you, Tim? Anything you would have done different up until this point?
Much along the same lines of Tom. People have been hunting for centuries up to this point, and they've been doing it with precision weapons. That's if you're going to kill the emus, that's what you need to do. You do not use the machine gun. They're horribly inaccurate and incredibly expensive. Spray and pray costs a lot of money. But ultimately, I would have done what they eventually did do.
Don't give it away. Don't give it away.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not.
Right.
But I would have done eventually what they did do.
Right.
Because the other, yeah,
I won't comment on it because I know what the real the best answer is. So, but
okay,
yeah.
My other thought is that more or less you when it comes to weaponry, you use the minimum amount of force and expense possible to get the job done. And with that in mind, because a lot of guns are weapons for killing other humans, they're not built for killing. How much do emus weigh? Like a few hundred pounds? I don't actually know.
I didn't have that on hand.
I think a little bit heavier than that.
Okay, but either way, they're a lot bigger than humans. There's a lot more mass to them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
That's completely wrong. 79 to 88 pounds for an average emu.
Holy shit! Okay, I was thinking the caliber of the bullets was too small for body hits to just down them. Because, like, if you hit a human in the torso, a lot of people will go down.
Right.
My thinking was when it comes to hunting deer, as far as I'm aware, part of the reason that you need aim for vital points is because the caliber isn't big enough to just whoomp down on anything less.
Right. So
I'm not gonna lie, the big stuff out of their bodies, I'm like, okay, the monster hunter approach. Yeah, sounds good.
When Pierce gave the order, Perth's Daily News reported, "No treaty of peace has been concluded, and the emus remain in possession of the disputed territory."
I'm just imagining a bird with a pen in its beak being like, "Ah!"
Right.
And signing the peace treaty.
Right. After the withdrawal of the military, the emu attacks on crops continued. Farmers again asked for support, citing the hot weather and drought that had brought the emus invading the farms in the thousands. James Mitchell, the premier of Western Australia, lent his strong support to a renewal of the military assistance. At the same time, a report from the base commander was issued that indicated 300 emus had been killed in the initial operation, which the numbers were very varied, right? The settlers didn't accept it either, and if Pierce wasn't going to support them, they would find a new champion. And they found one in Labour Party Secretary George Lambert. The farmers sent Lambert a telegram, and the telegram read, "Gunners withdrawn. Imperative they should stay. Emus beginning to reappear in large numbers. Can you do anything?" Lambert was the right man to call, it turns out. He railed against his fellow politicians for dropping out of the Emu War, and he didn't mince his words. This is what he said. "It's all very well for you city pussyfoots in the House of Representatives to make a little of the attempt of eradicating emus with machine guns. But the farmers, they don't think it's so funny."
Well, I damn well think it's funny.
Right? George Pierce reapproved the Emu War on November 11th. "Such strong representations have been made to me," he announced, "that I have approved the machine gun party returning to the wheat belt to destroy thousands of emus that are causing tremendous damage to crops." The Emu War was back in full swing. Taking to the field.
When will you
Nope.
learn?
Right?
Oh, you don't win against the emus.
Exactly.
You just survive the emus.
Right.
Taking to the field on the 13th of November, 1932, the military found a degree of success over the first 2 days, with approximately 40 more emus killed.
Yeah!
Right? On the third day, the 15th of November, they proved to be far less successful, but by the 2nd of December, the soldiers had finally got their shit in gear and were killing approximately 100 emus per week. Meredith was finally recalled on the 10th of December. In his final report, Major Meredith claimed that his teams had expended 9,860 rounds of ammunition and had killed a total of 986 emus, with a ratio of exactly 10 rounds per den bird.
Sounds like that man was making a whole lot of shit up.
This was consistent with the experience of one farmer who hit an emu with his truck that December. On examination of the dead bird, they found 9 bullets in its body, which had been stuck there for at least 2 weeks before the bird was killed by the truck.
Holy Christ! What the
See, they just needed a higher caliber rifle, basically a rifle that shot trucks.
The Lewis gun at that time fired 303 British rounds. These are not small projectiles in any way, shape, or form.
So, actually, I completely forget, and I'm dumb as a rock when it comes to guns. What does a .303 actually mean? Like, I assume it's a measurement.
It's diameter, I believe.
Okay, is that diameter in inches?
I think it's in millimeters, but I'm double checking to make sure I don't lie to you.
.303 millimeters would be minuscule. I feel like it's .303 inches.
Before they have their jackets on, they're 3 inches long.
They are measured. It is measured in hundreds or thousandths of an inch, or in millimeters. So this would be 303 thousandths of an inch.
Okay.
So this is a third of an inch.
Yeah, that's the big fat bullet.
Yeah, that bird got hit by 9 of them.
Oh my god!
And was still running around for 2 weeks.
I call hacks.
Exactly.
Turn off your god mode, Jesus Christ.
Exactly. So this was a rather successful military endeavor at this point. The 10 rounds per bird is not the worst, especially when you look at a lot of, military stats when you've got, thousands of rounds spent per casualty type of thing, because
that's true.
They do different stuff. For one extreme example is the Korean War. In the Korean War, they would just fire into the jungle in the mornings for what was called a crazy minute, or the wild minute, or something like that. So they would wake up at dawn and fire into the jungle. And for a whole minute, they would continue to fire. They don't know if anybody's out there. No reason, no alarms had been tripped, but it prevented anybody from attacking in the dark or at dawn or anything like that. And it definitely showed a lot of dominance in the area. So it worked out. Yeah, exactly. So bullets per casualty in war is really hard to track. There was something like 9 billion ammunition made in the U.S. for World War I. So,
holy Christ.
Yeah. But the emus didn't stay away forever. 3 years later, the country was hit with another drought. And at this time,
oh no,
the emus came back. The farmers wanted another emu war, but the government wasn't about to go down that road again. By now, right? By now, the story of the war had spread around the globe. And it kind of turned Australia into a bit of a laughingstock. And they didn't want it to make it any worse than it already was. Instead, they made an intelligent decision and began what they called the beak bonus system. The government put a bounty on every beak torn away from the corpse of a dead emu. This worked much better. In the first 2 months alone, 13,000 emu beaks were claimed. And by the end of the first year, 30,000 beaks were claimed. Right. And by
why send 2 guys out when you can offer a bounty and suddenly have a few thousand
right, exactly.
soldiers?
And they're spending their ammo on it. Nobody's paying for it. Exactly.
Well, it's not even that you're sending out soldiers, because what you what you ultimately need here is not soldiers.
You need hunters. Yeah.
Right.
And you're the people who live out in the country. I don't want to say this as a generalization, because I don't want it to be stereotypical, but a lot of people that I have personally known who live in a rural setting supplement their food stores with hunting.
Right.
Yeah, honestly,
they know how to do it.
I've been a city kid my whole life. I now live in a relatively small or large town, but it's not a city anymore. But I've never been hunting in my life. I want to. Some of my friends here in Oregon go hunting and will take a deer, and that's meat for several months. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm happy to save like $1,000 on meat and just eat venison for a year.
That being said, I have a friend whose family basically had to do that. It was their only way of really getting a ready supply of meat. They couldn't afford it. And he said to this day, he hates venison.
That's fair.
Because he always had it. Always.
Very fair, yeah.
Apparently the music does end at some point. Oh, it's running again. There we go. I don't know why.
Okay.
Weird. I'll have to keep an eye on for when that happens so we can make sure it keeps going. It's supposed to be like 6 hours of music. It shouldn't end. Anyway. Instead, okay. By the 50s, Australia then completed its 135-mile-long emu-proof fence, and the days of the emu raids came to an end.
Did you say the 50s?
Yes.
Yeah.
This started in the early 30s, didn't it? Just making sure.
My God. 18 years after the Emu Wars.
Oh my God.
That being said, this isn't like a barbed wire fence. This is a quote-unquote emu-proof fence. It's tall and it's stout. It's gonna take a little bit, and unless you've got a huge amount of crews working on it, which they wouldn't want to pay them,
Right.
Yeah.
it's gonna take a bit. Maybe not 18 years, but a bit.
Just the fact that the Emu Wars went for 18 years is amazing.
The farmers in the West, though, they never forgot the Emu War. Up until the fence was built, they called for militia every time the emus created a problem. And to the world, Major Meredith and his men were a joke. But to these farmers, they were the men
Heroes.
who saved their livelihood.
Yeah!
If it weren't for these brave men, we would be speaking emu today.
Oh my God.
Also, the fact that I got to craft this image, I made this image.
Right?
I'm so fucking proud of it. Fucking war memorial.
Oh my God.
Like, that better be one of your desktop background now.
Right. And another piece of information.
You sent me that in high res?
Right, yeah. Another piece of information for everybody. I thank you very much for that applause. The wiki entry for the military history of Australia does not mention the Emu War, and this is a shame. So, the man who started the Emu War does not mention it on his wiki. The history of Australia's military does not mention it on his wiki. But the Lewis light machine gun, in fact, in its service record, it's like the third one down, says the Emu War.
Also, Chad has a really good point that emu and soldier image would be a dope shirt.
Yeah.
I should do it.
Have that and just say
I
like,
would love that shirt.
Right?
like remember the emu below it.
Right?
The alley mew.
And I could even put that quote there, the thing that says that we'd all be speaking emu to this day. Like, okay, so I managed to stretch out 5 minutes of content on everybody else's videos to an hour and a half. So I think we did okay. This is my second episode of preparing content, so now I know a little bit more. The funnier it is, the faster we go through it, because that's how it goes. But there was more. I mean, I guess I have to find the yellow fever for every story, and that totally, I mean, totally helps with the time of the content.
Oh, on that note, Udo and I have a mutual friend who tagged us on a post on Facebook recently after last Thursday's show. Apparently, they are pretty sure they have found the wreck of the Bomber Shard.
Right.
Off the coast of Britain, cool. and they think it's still relatively intact and visible from the coastline.
Right.
All right, so when we make it big and we're rich as fuck, we're going to the Bon Richard.
Exactly.
Right.
Bonhomme Richard. Yep.
Hell yeah.
That was where he took the Serapis.
Yep.
All right, so next Thursday, everybody, it's definitely a show you want to come watch.
Yeah.
Next Thursday's topic is going to be the World War II animal heroes. We will definitely be covering Wojtek the bear.
Yeah!
And several heroic canines who served in World War II. And every single one that I've found so far served in official capacity. Wojtek was made a private in World War II. I cannot remember the name of the dog right off the hand because it's a very simple name and I messed with it, but it starts with a J. She
JPJ.
Right. She was the first animal official POW soldier, and yeah, and then there are going to be quite a few official rescue animals that are going to be covered, things like that. But it's going to be a really, really good episode.